data supporting a paper. Oh, let me see. I just got the message that the recording just started. Should I start from the beginning?
No, that's fine.
All right. So this is based on two earlier presentations. So one focusing on why to publish artifacts that are not just the data supporting a paper, but also including the software and workflows and other things that are used to inform how the results were produced. So it's partly about reproducibility and transparency, but you could also expand that to the more general case of sharing protocols and whatnot that you have produced during your research project. Then there's also another presentation that's more on how to manage research software, and that was given for a platform at SciLifeLab. And I'm using these as the starting point here. And I think the key message that I want to convey is that I mean, the code that you're producing is good enough or interesting enough to share if it's good enough to support your paper. So if you manage to produce the results and the code actually does something of importance to presenting or transforming the results or the raw data into those results, then you should share it because it is part of the approach that you've done, and it would allow others to give you feedback on how to improve the analysis in the future, or give them ideas on how to implement these methods or the steps required that you describe. This is a good article, so I would recommend taking a look. It's very brief and just an opinion piece, so coming from a software developer. In the more general context, there's also a drive towards increased transparency and reuse in the research community in general. And you will see more funders, institutes, and even journals requiring you to share and open up more of your research. So you have the extrinsic motivators basically telling you that you should share your code, and then I mean, this would give you some practical tips, or I would guide you to some sites where you can find some practical tips on how to do this. And then you could also consider this for yourself. So you have the potential problem of this working on your own computer, but maybe not on your PI's or your new colleague's computer. So publishing your research software and I mean, even smaller pieces of codes or workflows is a way to test it to the world, and having others reuse it and perhaps suggesting improvements or asking you some questions that would improve it and ensure that it can be reused or retested in the future. So this is not only for the benefit of the world, it could be also for the benefit of yourself. And while there is no conclusive papers that I found that I could cite on code actually contributing to more citations, I think that for data, at least supporting publications, if you make that available and cite it in your paper, there are evidence to say that you will get more citations, or these papers produce more impact. So there should also be some extrinsic motivators here. And if you're developing software that could be reused in the longer term, then you could actually direct them to different papers. And then for some context here. So in the research environment, and I see here in the chat that I'm not in the presenter mode. I'm going to see what I can do here. Let me check. Is this better?
Yes, that's great.
Good. When we're talking about code, software, and workflows here, or within the scope of this talk at least, you will have many different pieces of software throughout your research process. So starting up with planning your study and kind of keeping track of things, there are data management planning tools that are developed as services or as software kits that are being published, and those are research software in a sense. There are also software pieces that are delivered together with equipment for sequencing facilities, for example, and those are closely tied to the hardware itself. You could almost argue that it's part of the hardware, because without that software, you wouldn't really be able to make sense of the data coming out of the instrument. And then you have something here in between when you're coming to a more standardized form of the data being delivered or collected, and being able to just transform that into some common types of files that your research group or the research group in general would be able to work with. So this kind of software is usually a standard kind of set of utility tools that help you export in the kinds of formats that you want, or remove some bad parts of the data, or do quality assessment at an early stage to see that this is good enough. And that could also be an important piece of research software. And then as we go closer here towards the end on communicating the results, we're coming into customized data cleaning or data integration pipelines, where you try to combine different data sets coming from different platforms or annotations that you've made yourself, even annotation software that is used for adding annotations to this data that you've collected. And then some custom-made workflows or pipelines that would transform all of these kind of curated and harmonized data sets into the result sets that you're looking for. And this could be visualizations or tabular summaries, or just new file formats that you are aiming to share or base your support your results with. And then there are also these databases where you can actually share your results. And those databases are also, in a sense, software. For this purpose here, I think you can apply the principles across all of the spectrum here. So regardless if you're developing, data management or a research management kind of software that stewards the entire process, or if it's something related to equipment and custom hardware that you're designing in your research project, or if it's more on the analysis part, you could apply the principles equally. But I think there might be some nuance that you need to define based on your community, and find examples of how do people approach sharing that kind of code or that kind of software in the community that you're trying to tailor to. I've just taken a few definitions here from not random places, but maybe not really doing a comprehensive overview here. So, here you have code, which is basically just a set of instructions, or the script that defines what you want the computer to do for you. And software in this case, I use this to refer to something that's more of a packaged product that includes, maybe a set of different pieces of code that works together to do a larger set of tasks, and usually come with some sort of documentation. And these could be tools that are made available on the compute clusters, for example, or it could be software that you buy and is commercial. Some of this can actually run custom code that you develop yourself as well. So software like R or Python can actually run code written in languages that interpreter can execute. And the same goes for scientific computational workflows. there are workflow managers or runtimes that can define the sequence of executions of different software tools and organize the way that the data is being made accessible and then moved across different parts of your compute environment. So it's a sliding scale between all of these, and then you have a sliding scale between what the aims are here. And I think they align to some degree. You have, if you're talking about sharing code, then you might be more interested in sharing for the purpose of being transparent and showing what supports your research paper or a particular article. And it might also be for reproducibility, so that someone could actually take the data that you have and rerun more or less the same analysis on that data and get the same results. And then as you go down here towards software or scientific computational workflows, you might be more interested in being able to reuse these across different projects, or even share them with others or with your colleagues as something that can be kind of a community resource in a sense. And depending on which here, you might not go all out and put incredible amounts of time into packaging things like a software with extensive documentation and support channels. You might focus then on just making sure that, I mean, the code is structured enough so someone reading it can understand what it does and also understands what's necessary to get it to work on their computer, or what made it work on your computer in a sense. So for the case where you're actually developing software and hoping that these should be kind of future community resources, you might be considering sharing your or publishing basically a paper on that software in itself. And oftentimes in bioinformatics, you also have methods development, which is very kind of computer tools heavy, which means that you would often publish a paper that links to some sort of repository, and that they could be used as synonymous entities in a sense. So when someone is citing your or acknowledging that they've used your software, then they could cite the software itself with the name and the version of it that they've used for being able to reproduce it. But they could also share or cite the publication where you first announced it and describe the design principles and perhaps also the underlying methods that you have implemented in your software. So, I mean, what to cite depends a little bit on the context, but you should always make sure that it's possible to know which version of your software, if it has several versions, was used for a particular paper. And that could also be applied to manuscript and kind of the editorial process. So versioning, I think, is always useful, and having a strategy for that. So you could go back to, so this was the version used in the manuscript, and that has kind of gone through peer review. And then if you're starting to work or continuing your work on a project that might be leading up to many articles down the line, you might still need to be able to reference that specific version of your pipeline that you used for a particular manuscript. If you get questions, you might need to be able to rerun something and see why you get a certain piece of result. And in some cases, I don't think this is common practice yet, but some journals, you might have reviewers who would actually look at the code and base some of their comments on those parts of the publication as well. And then we have the other side of the equation here, which is I mean, these more kind of one-time type of analysis where you might have just set up all of these steps you need to do to harmonize your data set, and then perhaps configured the tools that you're running for this specific manuscript, and getting the outputs, the tables, the figures, and whatnots that you want. So this might be a one-time thing, and here you should just make sure that you have packaged the bundle of the code that you have used somewhere for the reproducibility purposes. And it would also be useful to describe, I mean, why this piece of code exists, what is it starting from, and what is the end result that you're looking for, and where possible, adding a kind of description, perhaps in words, or a bullet list that describes the sequence of the steps that it goes through. Some of this might be too much to include inside of the paper. So it might be useful to put this in a supplementary materials, or even better if you could package it some way with the code itself. And when we're talking about sharing the actual packages of this code, or related to the software itself, we can apply the same principles that have been used for sharing data. And the FAIR principles for sharing research data, they are an acronym for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And I mean, considering those different aspects for whatever you're trying to share is generally a good approach. And you could ask yourself a few questions here to basically address the different aspects. And then you have, for example, where will people be looking for this thing? And make sure that you have actually added your software or the piece of code to that registry or database, or just make sure that you have a citation in your paper that can take them to the code that you want them to be able to reuse. And then who should have access and how. And this could be if you're working with sensitive data, or that there might be some concerns with the licensing, or I mean, needing to protect patents or whatnot, then you might have some limitations on who should have access and how you should control it in that case. So make sure that you have some way that people could get in touch with you and be able to work on the data, or get access to the code. And then how to package it to make sure that it will work for someone else. And depending on what kind of code it is, or what kind of software it is, the package might take different shapes. So if you're working on some code for Python, that's going to be a reusable tool, and people will use it mostly inside of a Python programming environment. Then you might package it according to the package management system for Python packages in general, and make it available there so people could install it using the same mechanisms as they would for other Python libraries. And the same goes for R and the R ecosystem. And then there are ways you could package pieces of codes or pipeline in a way that they could run across different types of computational environments as well. And we include some courses at NBIS on how to reproduce or make your processes reproducible. And then we have the last part here, which is focusing on reuse. And that could include considering what kind of cross-references to other either required resources. So if your code requires some pieces of software for it to be able to run, or if it implements some algorithms that have been defined somewhere else, then it would be useful to reference these to make sure that someone who finds this package can make an informed assessment that this is a sound implementation and get the information that they need to set up their environment to be able to run it. So, I mean, you have this at the end, you would like to see connections across the publications to the research software that you've been using and to the data sets that have been used for that specific publication. So we would end up with this kind of linked web of different types of research artifacts, which each and individually is made fair according to all of these questions here. So it would be possible to kind of create these cross-links and make it easier for people to work in general. And some reflections here on sharing code. So when it comes to transparency, the aim is basically, this is how we did it. You want to show the purpose of the code and expose it for scrutiny. And then you have reproducibility, being able to do the same analysis again, reusability for people to be able to remix it or reuse it again. And then it could also be used for implementing or describing research methods themselves. This can lead to more citations, and it can also lead to new possible collaborations. And you can consider this as something you do for someone you don't know, or, I mean, potential future collaborators. But I think the same principles apply within your research group as well. And even for your future self. So make sure that if you make sure that you have good sharing practices and documentation practices for your code, it will also make it easier for you to reuse something that you did a few years back and might want to pick up on again. Or if a PhD student leaves your research group, then if you have implemented these practices in your group, then you might be able to pick up where they left their contributions when they moved on. And this is a moving field for sharing code and software. I think there needs to be some development on the best practices here, and some of that might be good to do in certain communities, and I think there are some examples of that. But in this case, I'm going to go through just some examples of resources that you can start looking at and that can inform some of your practices for sharing research software. And one here is a paper that rephrases or reconceptualizes the FAIR principles, but for research software, since the original paper focused on research data, and there are factors that are different. There are things that you should consider that are specific to research software. And this paper goes into some detail and argues why and some examples of how. Then there is this checklist, which is the resource that I will briefly take a look at today. And this is very easy to implement. So this is why I would suggest starting here. If you haven't published code before, this will give you some pretty useful recommendations. And I'm going to show this in the browser, and I will paste the link in the chat as well. So, I mean, they have narrowed it down to 5 recommendations here for FAIR software. And this applies to simple scripts and code as well as larger projects. So if we click on Let's Go here, the first principle is to use a publicly accessible repository with version control. And this is important because then basically people can follow your progress. You can add collaborators, and you get built-in version control, so you can go back to a certain version that was used for a particular paper. And if we look at the SciLifeLab community, and this is the data platform, I'm going to add this link as well here. We have quite a few examples which link to these repositories for source code, such as GitHub. And you can see this small icon shaped like a kitten, which is the logo for GitHub. But in some cases, the links actually go directly to the Git repository itself. I'm going to use this as the example. So the NF-core SAREC pipeline. And if we look at a repository here, a repository is basically a folder containing the code and other pieces of assets that should be shared together. In this platform, there is some metadata that describes the content of this folder. So there's a short description of what this is about, and then there is a website link, and then you also have some tags that can be used to kind of discover similar types of projects within this platform. And then there is a README file which describes this pipeline itself and some of the information about who was part of producing it and how it's supposed to be used. And then you also have at the bottom here a suggested way of citing this pipeline. And in this case, they have suggested that people cite the papers where they have introduced this pipeline itself. And then if we follow this link, if we go back to the top here, we have this link leading to the website. And in this case, the website is actually a record in a database that stores these kinds of workflows. So this pipeline is one of many well-documented pipelines that are all available through this same website called NF-core. So I will share this as one example, and then you have the SAREC pipeline. If I go back, sorry about that. And then you have the SAREC pipeline here. So depending on what kind of software you're working on, there might be different databases where these should be made available so people can find them. And there might be different practices and amounts of documentation that would be necessary. This is pretty well used, and it's been developed over a long period of time, which means that there's a lot of documentation and examples of how this has been applied for different use cases. This might not be valid for all projects, of course. And then another example, so beyond the NF-core database of these workflows, there are other places where you could share software depending on what kind of software it is, such as Bioconductor, which is our packages for bioinformatics in general, I would say. And you can submit your package to be included here if you follow the guidelines that they have set up. So if we click on this one, I can add a link to this one as well. So I would interpret this one, the first recommendation, as a public repository with version control, which is, for example, GitHub. And that's also being used quite extensively at SciLifeLab, including at NBIS, where I work. You should also make sure to include a license so people know how they can use your software. And for the example that we were looking at here, we can see that here there is a license called the MIT license, And if we go into the recommendations here, there's actually some links here on how to choose the appropriate license for your piece of code. And a quick reflection in this case is that, I mean, you cannot really take some software and remix it unless you know under which terms it was made available from the beginning. And in some cases, the license also require you to acknowledge the software creator in a certain way in papers and in other contexts. So that can also be something to keep in mind as someone who's browsing and looking for software. Then, I mean, there are different licenses for that applies to the code itself, and other licenses that would apply to images and I mean, data sets and things like that. So these links would help you choose. And then you should register your code in a community registry, which is, for example, the pipelines database here for the NF Core case, or in Bioconductor if it's a R package for bioinformatics. But there are plenty of other places that you could consider. And I mean, you could even consider the data SciLifeLab.se services if this is something that would be applicable to the community of users that's using this website. And then you should also make sure that you can cite the software. And you can do that, as they've done in NF Core here, by suggesting a citation based on a paper where this software was introduced. And a potential benefit of this is that you would be getting more citations for the paper and increased impact based on that. But if you really want someone to be able to reuse or rerun an analysis, you also need to make sure that they can cite the specific version of the software that was used for that particular paper. And in this case, we can see that there, if you look at this pipeline and how it's made available here on the NF Core page, you can see that there are many versions here. So you can always go back to a previous version. And you can see here at the top as well, at the URL, that this actually includes a specific version string. And if I go back to a previous version, I can recover it and run this specific version of it. And this could be important. So make sure that you have some sort of versioning convention that you can stick to, so people can say that this is the version we used, and then some way to actually get access to that specific version. And you can also publish code to the Figshare repository that's offered by SciLifeLab Data Center. So you can link a Git repository to the Figshare instance offered by SciLifeLab, and then you could get a GUI for a specific version of your software. So if you don't want to necessarily learn how to keep track of versioning and set these kind of versioning conventions, then you could issue a simple GUI or adopt just a date timestamp or something like that based on when you published a new version to Figshare. And then you should also use some sort of software quality checklist. And there are plenty of these for different domains. There are some that are more kind of generic that you can find here, but you can find plenty of these as well for in publications in your specific domain. So these checklists could, on the one hand, help you look at your code and see if there's something that you can clean up to make it better, or figure out how you should test it to make sure that it's actually something that people could reuse. But you could always kind of go back to the general principles. I mean, considering your own interpretation or answer to these questions after looking around a little bit and asking your colleagues. So, I mean, how do you make this findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable? And then this checklist is just a way of guiding you to some resources and giving you some examples. And then I would encourage you to go into, for example, the SciLifeLab data platform services here, and look at the different tools that are available and what they've done to make them more discoverable. And with that, I will wrap up and just noting that there are also developments in this field on how to package data together with the code that was used to generate that data. And also shouting out for the reproducible research courses that we offer at NBIS. I'm not sure when the next one is, unfortunately, but you should be able to find it on the NBIS website or at the SciLifeLab events curriculum. So it's tools for reproducible research. And with that, I think I'm gonna stop here. So, Katarina, how do we work with questions?
Yes, sorry, I don't think you can see me at the moment. I think we can, do we have any questions in the chat? I think that's the first question. Just have to check.
So no questions in the chat.
No questions in the chat. Then I think we will just open for questions from the audience. So I think the easiest way is just to raise your hand so we can see who is asking. And yeah, the floor is open for questions.
So can I ask a question perhaps to the audience? Have you, if you could raise your hands in the Zoom room here, if you have published or developed research software, I mean, something that would be reused by others, so that you intend to make sure that it can be reused by others. So I see a few people here. Yep, very nice to see. And then some of you, who of you are currently looking to publish something or trying to improve the way you're publishing your code? I see a few people there as well. And then, I mean, to those of you who have raised your hands, did this presentation answer some of your questions, or is there something that's still kind of up in the air that I could try to answer?
Yeah, I think it's answered. I should look more into detail this websites that you shared. But it will be very nice. I took this reproducibility courses from NBIS before, also the SnakeMake course. But it will be very nice to have like a specific course to, if you have a code, like how to make it publish better so that you can work together with experts.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, I think it would probably be useful to create some sort of small community of NBIS or SciLifeLab and friends that could try to converge on some best practices, at least within our community, and how we can support each other. I know that we have a channel for reproducible research for NBIS staff working with bioinformatics support and how they can support the research projects that consult with us. But I think it might be interesting to have something similar, but for projects or people involved in building research software that should be made available to a larger audience across SciLifeLab and beyond.
Yeah, because I'm a PhD student, so it's not really like my task to make this code or like a software. I'm trying to do this on my like a side project, and it's always difficult to get support from my supervisor while doing that.
Yes, and I see we now have a question from Rama about if Wolmar, if you could kindly suggest the measures that we need to take to ensure the reusability of code snippets of functions across different projects.
Yes, I think, I mean, for reproducibility, I think that is a complicated question, and it's not something that I can answer in the time we have left for, I mean, an exhaustive give an exhaustive answer to. I mean, there are some ways of packaging code together with the software that was used or that it relies on. So you could use a concept called containers. And there are different versions of containers. For example, you have Docker and there's Singularity that can be used on UPMAX and other clusters. And that is a way to kind of get the script and the code that you have bundled together with the data and external environment that is required to get things to run. So that would be a way of getting your ensuring that your analysis works somewhere else with a big kind of it depends attached to it, because if you're relying on hardware resources that are a scarce resource only available in a few different places, then it might not work as you expect if you move things from one cluster to another. So I think documentation and actually testing to try to move your code into a different environment where you think that it should also work, that would be kind of the way to approach it. So I mean, you could do that yourself, or you can work with a peer who could kind of look at the code, just read through it and see if they understand it, and if they could get it to run on their computer, or actually set up a set of different types of environments where that piece of code should be able to run, and routinely test that it actually works. And if you're in a research group, maybe you can have a few people with the different types of computers that they might have. Someone might have a Windows computer and someone might have a Mac, Apple computer. And just make sure that when you make updates and changes to your code, that you could actually run it across your closest collaborators. And then I think that would achieve at least the critical level of interoperability, I think, for your collaborators. Rama, did that answer your question?
Yes, I did. Thank you very much.
Yeah, but I mean, I would suggest the reproducible research course that we have at NBIS that would introduce you to containers and also versioning and some other good practices of actually kind of implementing routines and some tools that help you make things more reproducible.
Yeah, I'm looking at those pages right now. Thank you.
Yes, and we should always also mention that the joint effort between NBIS and Data Center, which is a SciLifeLab data management effort, you can also always reach us at the data management sciliflab.se. So we're always happy to help. I think the next question was from Andrea. Also for Wolmar here, have you identified any promising language agnostic standard for documenting dependencies and versioning? And he's also adds an example to CodeMeta, but he hasn't seen it being used.
Yeah, so I must say that I don't really know about this. And I'm not sure how or to what degree it is feasible. I mean, there are some efforts towards trying to standardize I mean, some types of descriptions of workflows, for example. So there's an effort towards a common workflow language that would be able to exchange workflows across different workflow managers. So that's a way of standardizing. I mean, basically creating a programming language in a sense that could then be reused across different environments. So, I mean, just as you have Exchange file formats that can be used to transfer files from a proprietary software like Word to other software that might not be able to work or open that specific format. So you could think about an Excel file and then transferring that as a CSV file or something on those lines. When it comes to dependencies here, I mean, the types of dependencies will vary so much, and some of the dependencies themselves rely on the environment where they will be executed. So I think if you're talking about, I mean, Unix dependencies, like you want to be able to install a set of tools in the environment, or a Linux environment, and you want to install a certain set of tools in that environment, then you could do that using the built-in package manager, and there are some ways of doing that. But then there's also some efforts of packaging the tools in a platform agnostic manner that allows you to create binaries or versions of the tools that are compatible across different operating systems. And for an example of that is Conda, which is a package manager where you could install the same tool. I mean, you would give the name of the tool and the version you want, basically, and then it would get the version of the tool that's compatible with your platform. And that requires a lot of work from contributors to curate the database that basically contains the tools and test that the tools actually run on the normal environments. I'm not exactly sure how this would translate more generally to dependencies for programming languages and libraries that you might need to compile or run a snippet of code in some sort of interpreter. But I would be very happy to investigate that with you if that is. I think I need to know a little bit more about the use case that this would try to address. I mean, if it's when would you need this language agnostic way of describing the dependencies, so to speak, that doesn't rely on the programming language's own mechanism for making dependencies available. Did that answer the question to some degree at least, or describe at least my understanding of the problems in that space?
Maybe we lost Andre, or he can't hear us. Either way, as always, I think that you probably also mentioned that if you have questions after the seminar and you you think about something in the afternoon or in a week, you're always very welcome to contact us, either of course contact Wolmar directly or to contact the SciLifeLab Data Management Seminar Series on data management at scilifelab.se, both with questions concerning this event, but also future events. And I kind of just wanted to, first of all, of course, thank Wolmar for a great presentation, and also invite all of you to join our next event, which will be 17th of April, same time, 10 to 11. And that will focus on sensitive data. What can you do as a researcher? So very welcome to join that event and also future events. Please look at our webpage every now and then to see what is up and coming. And thank you for joining, and have a happy Easter and a nice holiday coming up.